Single father CEO mistakenly sends his daughter to the wrong daycare, only to encounter the woman who will transform his life. Ethan Miller's morning had already descended into mayhem. The piercing ring of his phone had woken him at 5:30 a.m., his assistant reminding him of the crucial board meeting later that day. Between reviewing last-minute reports and handling urgent emails, he hardly had time to breathe, let alone get his young daughter, Emma, ready for daycare. Now, as he navigated a sleek black Mercedes through the crowded streets of Los Angeles, he glanced at Emma in the back seat to the rear-view mirror. She was softly humming a tune, her small hands clutching her stuffed bear. "All right, sweetie," he said, pulling up to the daycare. "We're here." Emma blinked, staring at the unfamiliar building with wide eyes. "But, Daddy, this isn't my school." Ethan barely registered her words. His mind was already racing ahead to the conference call he needed to take in exactly 10 minutes. "I know, honey," he said, unbuckling her seatbelt. He knelt in front of her, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "We're trying a new place today, okay? You'll have so much fun." Emma hesitated, glancing around. The colorful sign above the entrance read, "Little Stars Daycare," but it wasn't the place she was used to. "But what if I don't like it?" she asked, her voice small. Ethan smiled, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. "You'll be fine, Emma, I promise." With that, he handed her off to a waiting staff member, barely sparing a second glance as he rushed back to his car. He had no idea he had just made a serious mistake. Sophia Bennett had always believed that children had an instinct for people's true nature. So when Emma Miller walked into Little Stars Daycare, clutching her stuffed bear like a lifeline, Sophia knew immediately that this little girl didn't belong here. The first red flag, she wasn't on the student list. The second, the man who had dropped her off had practically sprinted out the door, not bothering to double-check a single detail. Frowning, Sophia crouched down to Emma's level. "Hey there, sweetie, what's your name?" Emma's big blue eyes flickered with hesitation before she whispered, "Emma Miller." Sophia's heart clenched. The girl was clearly nervous. "Well, Emma, it looks like we weren't expecting you today. Do you know your teacher's name?" Emma shook her head, squeezing the bear tighter. Sophia pulled out the emergency contact list and dialed the listed guardian number. No answer. She tried again, still nothing. She sighed. This was exactly why she hated dealing with high-profile parents. They always assumed someone else would handle things for them. Realizing she had no immediate way of reaching Emma's father, Sophia softened. "How about this? You stay with me today, and we'll figure things out when your daddy comes back, okay?" Emma nodded slowly. And so, Sophia spent the entire day with Emma, helping her with arts and crafts, reading stories, and even sitting with her during lunch when she refused to eat alone. By the time the afternoon rolled around, Emma had opened up, laughing and playing with the other children. Sophia, however, was not looking forward to the inevitable confrontation with a man who had left his daughter behind without a second thought. Ethan strode into the daycare with a controlled sense of urgency. He had barely made it through his last meeting when a voicemail from an unknown number had come through, one that made his stomach drop. "Mr. Miller, this is Sophia Bennett from Little Stars Daycare. Your daughter was dropped off at our facility by mistake this morning. I've been trying to reach you all day. Please call me back immediately." How could this have happened? His assistant had confirmed Emma's daycare drop-off location the night before. As he stepped inside, his sharp gaze scanned the room until it landed on a woman standing with Emma, arms crossed, watching him with an expression that was both unimpressed and challenging. Ethan immediately recognized the frustration in her eyes. She wasn't happy with him. Neither was Emma. The little girl pouted as soon as she saw him. "Daddy, you put me in the wrong school." Ethan exhaled, kneeling in front of her. "I know, sweetie. That was Daddy's mistake. I'm sorry." Emma huffed, crossing her tiny arms. "I like it here." He barely had time to process that before the woman, Sophia, cleared her throat. "You must be Ethan Miller," she said, her voice even but edged with disapproval. The man who didn't bother answering his phone all day, his head snapped up, brows furrowing. "I had back-to-back meetings." Sophia didn't flinch. "And I had a scared little girl who didn't know why she was here. Tell me, Mr. Miller, what exactly was so important that you couldn't check your phone when your daughter needed you?" Ethan felt an unfamiliar pang of guilt. "I appreciate you taking care of her," he said coolly, keeping his emotions in check. "But this was an accident. It won't happen again." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "No, it won't, because next time I won't just call. I'll report it to child services." His jaw tightened. No one talked to him like that. But before he could fire back a retort, Emma reached for Sophia's hand, looking up at her with complete trust. And that's when something shifted inside Ethan. Emma was comfortable with this woman. More than that, she liked her. For the first time in years, Ethan Miller found himself at a complete loss for words. And Sophia Bennett, she had just become the woman he wouldn't be able to ignore. The moment Ethan carried Emma out of Little Star's daycare, she made her displeasure clear. "Daddy, I want to come back here tomorrow," she declared, her tiny hands gripping his suit sleeve. Ethan frowned as he secured her in the car seat. "Emma, this isn't your daycare. Your school is across town." "But I like it here," she pouted. "Miss Sophia is nice." Ethan exhaled, already feeling a headache coming on. "I'm sure she is, but you have friends at your real daycare." Emma shook her head, her curls bouncing. "Miss Sophia played with me, and she read my favorite book twice." He barely refrained from rolling his eyes. He still wasn't entirely sure what to make of Sophia Bennett. Yes, she had taken care of Emma in his absence, but she had also called him out in a way no one else ever dared to. And yet, something about the way Emma clung to the idea of returning gave him pause. That night as he tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with those wide blue eyes, the ones that always made him weak. "Please, Daddy," she whispered, "just one more day." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Just one more day. What was the worst that could happen? The next morning, Ethan found himself back at Little Star's daycare, leading a beaming Emma through the doors. Sophia looked up from where she was kneeling beside a group of toddlers, her gaze landing on him with a flicker of surprise. "Back so soon?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. Ethan straightened his tie. Emma insisted. Sophia smirked. Smart girl. He opened his mouth to respond, maybe with a sarcastic remark, but Emma was already running toward the play area, leaving them alone. A beat of silence stretched between them. Ethan finally spoke, his voice measured. "I'm letting her stay for a few days." Sophia tilted her head, arms crossing over her chest. "And you trust me with that?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did he?" "I trust my daughter," he said simply. "And she seems to trust you." Something flickered in Sophia's expression, something unreadable. Fair enough. For the next few days, Ethan kept his distance. He arrived at the same time every morning, dressed in crisp suits, barely saying more than a polite nod to Sophia before leaving. But he watched, always watched, and what he saw began to chip away at his initial perception of her. One afternoon, he arrived early to pick up Emma and found Sophia sitting with the children in a reading circle. Emma was curled up beside her, listening with rapt attention as Sophia read "Good Night, Moon." But it wasn't just the reading. It was the way Sophia engaged them, the way she gave each child attention and warmth. Ethan stood frozen near the doorway, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. When the story ended, Emma turned and spotted him, her face lighting up. "Daddy," she called, running over. Sophia looked up as well, catching his gaze. For the first time since they met, Ethan didn't see defiance in her eyes. He saw understanding, and that realization shook him more than he cared to admit. Ethan wasn't sure why he arrived at Little Star's daycare earlier than usual. He told himself it was just a free moment in his schedule, a coincidence. But as he stepped inside, pausing at the doorway, he realized it had nothing to do with time. It had everything to do with her. Across the room, Sophia sat cross-legged on a rug, surrounded by children, her voice soft and animated as she read Where the Wild Things Are. The kids hung on to every word, their faces full of wonder. And there, nestled against Sophia's side, was Emma, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of Sophia's sweater, as if she belonged there. Ethan should have interrupted, should have announced his presence, but instead he stood there, watching as Sophia brushed a strand of hair from Emma's face, her touch gentle, watching as Emma leaned into her warmth, utterly content. A warmth spread through his chest. Something foreign. Something dangerous. For years, Ethan had kept his world controlled, orderly. There was no room for distractions or emotions. And yet, he felt something shift. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. A week later, it happened again. Ethan arrived to find Emma fast asleep on Sophia's lap, her tiny body curled up against her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sophia was stroking Emma's hair absent-mindedly, whispering a lullaby. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. He had spent the past 4 years raising Emma alone, ensuring she had everything she needed except this: the warmth of a mother's embrace, the security of being held. His throat tightened. He had convinced himself that Emma was fine without it. But seeing her there, resting so peacefully in Sophia's arms, he knew he had been lying to himself. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something he never allowed himself to feel: longing. Ethan wasn't a man who let himself dwell on matters. But something about Sophia lingered in his thoughts. The way she was with Emma, the way she carried herself, the way her eyes held a depth he couldn't quite understand. One evening, after putting Emma to bed, he found himself doing something he never did: looking her up. It didn't take long to find an article buried in the archives. Asterisk tragic car accident claims lives of Bennett family. Only daughter survives. Asterisk Ethan stared at the screen, his pulse steady but his mind spinning. Sophia had lost her entire family in a single moment. And yet, instead of breaking, she had built a life caring for children, offering the love she had lost. Something inside him twisted. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the weight of her past or the realization that he was allowing himself to care. Ethan had spent years keeping his emotions locked away, ensuring that his world remained professional and distant. He had convinced himself that love, real, all-consuming love, was a liability. And Sophia, she was the greatest threat to that belief. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He pulled away. Sophia noticed it immediately: the change in Ethan's demeanor, the way his gaze lingered on her less often, the way his voice held a sharper edge when he spoke to her. At first she thought she had imagined it, but as the days passed, she realized it wasn't just in her head. He was distancing himself. And the worst part? She didn't know why. Then, one rainy afternoon, fate intervened. Ethan's car broke down outside the daycare. Sophia had been cleaning up for the day when she saw him standing in the rain, inspecting the engine with frustration clear on his face. Before she could think twice, she stepped outside with an umbrella. "You'll catch pneumonia if you keep standing there like that," she called out. Ethan looked up, rain dripping from his dark hair, his suit already soaked. "Car trouble?" she asked, tilting her head. He exhaled. Apparently. She hesitated for only a second before offering, "Come inside, at least until the tow truck arrives." He looked like he wanted to refuse. But then he glanced at the sky, sighed, and followed her in. Inside, the daycare was quiet, the children already gone for the day. Sophia handed him a towel and a steaming cup of tea. "I don't drink tea," Ethan muttered. Sophia smirked, sitting across from him. "You do now." For the first time in weeks, they sat together without barriers, without tension. And for the first time, Ethan found himself not wanting to leave. Ethan Miller prided himself on being a man of control. Control over his business, control over his time, control over his emotions. But Sophia Bennett had thrown all that into chaos. Ever since that rainy afternoon in the daycare, where they had sat together in easy silence, he had felt something shift, something dangerous, something uncontrollable. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering what she was doing, how her day was going, what she looked like when she wasn't surrounded by children, but simply being herself. And that terrified him. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. He had spent years ensuring his life was structured, free of personal entanglements. Emma was the exception, his only exception. So Ethan did what he had always done when faced with something that threatened his carefully built walls. He pulled away. His greetings became shorter. His eye contact with Sophia became fleeting. If he had once lingered at the daycare for an extra 5 minutes just to watch Emma play, now he was in and out in under 60 seconds. And the worst part? He could see the way it hurt her. Sophia wasn't naive. She noticed a change immediately. The warmth that had once existed between them, gone. The quiet smiles, no longer there. And yet, she never confronted him about it, because deep down she already knew. Ethan Miller wasn't running from her. He was running from himself. Sophia had never been one to chase after people who didn't want to stay. She had learned that lesson the hard way, when life had taken everyone she loved from her in one cruel instant. So when Ethan started keeping his distance, she didn't fight it. She didn't demand an explanation. She simply accepted it. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt, because somewhere along the way, without meaning to, without even realizing it, she had fallen for him. She had fallen for the way he looked at Emma, not just as a father, but as a man who wanted to give his daughter the world. She had fallen for the way his voice softened that night in the daycare, as if kindness was something foreign to him but precious all the same. She had fallen for the man who hid his heart behind steel walls, but, for a brief moment, had let her peek inside, and now he was shutting her out. So Sophia made her choice. She pulled away, too. She stopped staying late in the afternoons when she knew Ethan might arrive. She avoided meeting his eyes whenever he did come. If he wanted distance, she would give it to him. But someone else noticed a shift. Emma. The little girl was sharp, perceptive in a way most adults underestimated. "Miss Sophia," Emma said one afternoon, her small hands gripping the hem of Sophia's sweater. "Why doesn't Daddy smile at you anymore?" The question hit Sophia harder than she expected. She forced a smile, kneeling down to meet Emma's innocent gaze. "Oh, sweetheart, your daddy's just very busy." Emma pouted. "But he used to laugh when he saw you, and now he just looks sad." Sophia's heart squeezed. She wanted to tell Emma the truth, that sometimes adults made things more complicated than they needed to be, that sometimes fear got in the way of happiness. But Emma was just a child, and Sophia was just a woman who had let herself fall for a man who wasn't ready to love her back. Ethan had spent his life making calculated decisions. Yet, as he sat on the edge of Emma's bed, tucking her in for the night, he realized he had never felt more lost. Emma clutched her stuffed bear, blinking up at him with sleepy eyes. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart." She hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you love Miss Sophia?" Ethan's breath caught. His entire body tensed at the question, as if she had just exposed a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Why would you ask that, Emma?" he said carefully. Emma pouted. "Because when you used to see her, you smiled. But now you don't." And she looked sad, too. Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. This was his 4-year-old daughter, the person who saw straight through him, even when he refused to see himself. And she was right. Ethan had been avoiding the truth, avoiding his feelings, because the truth was, he did love her. He loved the way she cared for Emma. He loved the way she challenged him. He loved the way her laughter made the world feel lighter. But most of all, he loved who he was when he was with her, and he had been a fool for running away. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to Emma's forehead. "Thank you, sweetie." "For what?" she yawned. "For reminding me what really matters." The next morning, Ethan didn't go to work. Instead, he went straight to Little Star's daycare. The moment he stepped inside, the room went quiet. The children playing near the reading area froze, their wide eyes locking onto him. And then he saw her. Sophia was standing near a group of kids, reading a picture book aloud. When she looked up and saw him, her expression shifted instantly. "Ethan," she said cautiously, closing the book, "what are you doing here?" Every fiber in his body told him to be careful, that this wasn't the time or place. But he had wasted too much time already. "I need to talk to you," he said. "In private," Sophia added, her voice guarded. But before she could step away, Ethan shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I need to say this here." A few children gasped dramatically. Some of the staff exchanged looks. But Ethan didn't care. "I was afraid," he admitted, stepping closer. "Afraid of what it meant to care about you. Afraid of what would happen if I let you in." Sophia's breath hitched. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice lower now, more vulnerable. "But you were right, Sophia. I was running. I was convincing myself that keeping my distance was the safest choice. His eyes softened as they met hers. But then I realized something. She swallowed. What? Ethan exhaled, his entire world narrowing down to her. I'm more afraid of living without you. The room was silent. Sophia's lips parted slightly, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. But Ethan meant every word. I love you, Sophia, he said, finally speaking the truth he had been too afraid to admit. And I don't want to run anymore. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and then, to his absolute relief, she smiled. For the first time in weeks, Sophia let herself feel everything. The fear, the longing, the love. And as she looked at Ethan standing there completely open, completely raw, she knew this wasn't just a man who had finally let his guard down. This was the man she had been waiting for all along. With a shaky breath, she whispered, "You idiot." Ethan blinked. "I what?" She laughed through her tears and took a step forward, wrapping her arms around him. "You love me," she murmured against his chest. His arms circled around her, holding her close. "Yeah," he breathed, "I really do." And for the first time in his life, Ethan Miller knew exactly where he belonged. Right here in Sophia's arms. The laughter of children filled the air at Little Star's Daycare, blending with the warm afternoon sunshine streaming through the windows. Sophia stood in the middle of the playroom, watching a group of toddlers build a castle out of wooden blocks. Her heart swelled with happiness. This daycare had been her life's work, her passion, and now it was home in more ways than one. "Miss Sophia, Daddy's here." Emma's excited voice rang across the room, and Sophia turned just in time to see Ethan Miller stepping inside. Dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, he looked as confident as ever, but there was something softer in his eyes now, something only she got to see. Emma ran to Sophia, grabbing her hand. "Come on, Miss Sophia. Daddy has a surprise." Sophia chuckled, allowing the little girl to pull her forward. "A surprise?" Ethan stopped a few feet away, slipping his hands into his pockets, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Emma, sweetheart, do you think you can give me a moment alone with Miss Sophia?" Emma giggled but nodded. "Okay, but don't take too long. I want to see the surprise, too." She darted off to join her friends, leaving Sophia and Ethan standing in the middle of the daycare, surrounded by colorful walls and tiny chairs. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "All right, Miller, what's going on?" Ethan took a deep breath, then dropped down on one knee. Sophia's breath hitched. The entire daycare went silent as little eyes turned toward them, whispering excitedly. Ethan pulled out a small velvet box and flipped it open, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "Sophia Bennett," he said, his voice steady, but filled with something raw and real. "A year ago, I walked into this daycare thinking I was just dropping my daughter off at the wrong place. Instead, I found the right place, the right person." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "You changed everything," Ethan continued. "You showed me what it means to love, to trust, to build something real. And I don't want to spend another day without you by my side." He exhaled, looking up at her with pure, unguarded love. "So, Sophia, will you marry me?" A small gasp rippled through the daycare. The children, the teachers, even Emma, all were holding their breath, waiting for her answer. Sophia let out a shaky laugh, covering her mouth with one hand before nodding furiously. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, Ethan, 1,000 times yes." A cheer erupted from the children as Ethan slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. Emma practically tackled them, hugging them both. "We're going to be a family." Ethan kissed the top of his daughter's head, his gaze locking onto Sophia's. "We already are." And for the first time in his life, Ethan Miller knew he had everything he'd ever wanted. 1 year later, the sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air as Sophia leaned against Ethan's shoulder, their hands intertwined. Their wedding had been a beautiful, intimate ceremony by the ocean, surrounded by the people they loved most. And now, as they sat on the back porch of their beach house, watching Emma chase seagulls along the sand, Sophia placed a hand on her growing belly. Ethan noticed a movement immediately, turning to her with a soft smile. "He's kicking," Sophia whispered. Ethan placed his hand over hers, feeling the gentle movement. His throat tightened with emotion. "A son," he murmured. "We're having a son." Sophia smiled, leaning into him. "A little brother for Emma, a perfect addition to our family." Ethan kissed her temple, pulling her closer. He had spent so many years believing that love was a distraction, that opening his heart would only lead to pain. But now, with Sophia in his arms, their daughter laughing in the distance, and their unborn child kicking against his palm, he knew he had never been more wrong. Because this was everything. Ethan Miller thought he had everything: wealth, power, success. But it took one wrong daycare, one incredible woman, and one loving daughter to show him what truly mattered. Sophia Bennett never expected that a simple mistake would lead her to the love of her life. But love has a way of finding us when we least expect it. In the laughter of a child, in the warmth of an unexpected embrace, and in the quiet moments where hearts learn to trust again. Ethan, Sophia, and Emma found their way to a family they never knew they were missing. And in the end, love didn't just change their lives, it completed them. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming tale that reminds us all, sometimes, the most beautiful love stories come from the most unexpected places. Because love, no matter how it begins, always finds its way home.